everyone, it's Swank Ivy with another Letters to an Asexual. This is number 92, and this just requires a little bit of background. I'm going to share some comments that I received on a video where I had talked at length about some of the behavior that I've had to deal with, largely on sites that are perceived to be dating sites, from men, generally cisgender, heterosexual men, who really feel entitled to talk to me a certain way or feel entitled to certain treatment or attention, and are upset about me being asexual because they're like, well, why would you decide that without trying me, etc. So obviously I have made a lot of videos that address people who are coming from that perspective. I'm using real examples, and I don't even remember which video of mine this comment that I'm going to read you came from, but it was one of those wherein I discussed that behavior from cisgender heterosexual men, and I must have said that phrase somewhere in there because I received a comment to that effect. And so I'm going to talk about what this person said, and then I'm also going to talk about the fact that cisgender heterosexual men are certainly not the only people who attack asexual people, and I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit. But first, my jerk for the day. Well, let's bring him up. And like I said, I do not remember which of my videos. I'm getting close to 100 of them now, so I don't remember which one this person actually said this on. Anyway, he commented to say, I find insinuating that cis heterosexual male are the only ones who have such disagreement with asexuality is a social justice warrior bullshit thing to say, in all honesty. I replied to him and said, though that is not even close to what I said. I said something else about what cis straight men have done and are taught. And if you are honest, you will argue with what I actually said. Considering how many of the letters I share here are not from that population, it's gross to pretend that was a good point I made. But I guess bias will make you hear what you want to hear. He replied with one sentence. Passive-aggressive much? I replied, you explicitly accused me of saying a specific thing I did not say. I told you I did not say what you lied about me saying, and advised you to argue with what I said, not what you completely made up. That is not passive-aggressive. Words mean things. You seem really confused about what is being said here, and really angry about conversations that are taking place in your head, not on this website. Pay attention to what people say. You don't get to invent quotes they didn't say and then sneer at them. That's not how this works. He replied, I quote that as to say that many people use that in a manner that is meant to be some sort of insult or win to an argument. If you think how I perceived what you said is wrong, do inform me about what you supposedly said that was such a victory. You did make a dig towards cis men in some manner, as to say they are just these sex-craving, pushy people, as to say that their father said, yes, you should push your sexual needs upon others in an inappropriate manner. Social justice warriors love a good shaming of cis males, so please inform me on how you said that they were civilized people in society. I replied, nope. You can't just say, you said cis heterosexual males. Now I get to insert whatever I want before or after that phrase and make assumptions about what you must believe. This video even has a transcript if you're having trouble understanding the words I spoke or don't want to go back and listen to it again. I'm not going to recite what I already said to you and explain word for word why it does not fit whatever convoluted agenda you've dreamed up and assigned to me. I'm not interested in defending my words against bizarre commentary that makes it clear that you're not here to have any kind of conversation with me. You probably need to sit down and think about why you spoke to me, because it certainly wasn't to exchange any kind of honest ideas. The idea of continuing to converse with someone who keeps using social justice warriors unironically is unappealing too. I will be ending this here. And I blocked the person. So, first point, I have seen a lot of people who are very upset that so-called social justice warriors exist, and from them comes this idea that we use the fact that someone is cis or someone is white or someone is a man as if it's self-evident that that person is a jerk or accusing them of being one of those things means we think we've won some argument. I've seen it from anti-feminists, I've seen it from racists, you know, these people who are saying, oh, all you have to do is say that I'm a transphobe, all you have to do is say I'm a racist, and then the conversation's over, and everyone accuses me of being an awful person because you called me a racist, or you called me cis, or whatever. They think cis is a slur because I guess it was a term that they didn't accept. They'd rather everyone just call them normal, and everyone else who is not cis be considered freaks, right? Like, they don't think that there should be a reason to name the majority. And so if we start talking about damaging ideas that people use the status quo of being a cisgender person, being a white person, being whatever majority you're part of, as, like, if we're to acknowledge that being part of a majority population involves some level of privilege, that if we're saying that people need to acknowledge this and work with it in mind if they're going to interact with these populations that are minorities, who are marginalized in some fashion, and that they want to truly understand and truly at least stop being part of the problem, then they need to not take it as an insult that we are naming the majority, that we're saying that you were raised with these beliefs if you're part of this system, and you do benefit from the privilege that comes from being part of that population. You know, I am a woman, and I'm an asexual person and a queer person, so therefore those two things, I understand that I don't have privileges. I'm part of a marginalized class, but I'm a white person, although some people who are uber racists would say that because I'm Jewish that I'm inferior, but I absolutely am perceived as a white person in society. And I guess a lot of people who would seek to harass me because I'm Jewish wouldn't guess from looking at me most of the time, because I have light-colored hair, and they have these beliefs that all Jewish people have dark hair and like look Jewish, and I don't know, people are gross about that sort of thing. They get all essentialist on it about what people look like if they're part of whatever race or whatever marginalized population they claim to think are physically inferior. You know, and you hear this with transphobes too, like people who say you can always tell who's trans by looking at them, and then it's just so simple to trick them, like that you post a picture of a known to be cisgender woman and you say, oh, so I guess this person is really a man, and then they'll be like, well, look at the person's bone structure, he has an Adam's apple, blah blah blah, and it's like somebody that's a well-known movie star who's a cis woman and is not, you know, is not trans, is not gender non-conforming, and they, when it's framed like that, they insist they can see it, and they can't, because there isn't a certain specific way that trans people look. But anyway, I'm going off the subject. People like this are obviously, they're disingenuous. They assume that if you ever say something like, well, cis people have these privileges, or if this person has a very narrow view that everyone in the world is cis and everyone in the world is heterosexual or should be, then, you know, get these attitudes from them. And if you say that these systems exist, then all of a sudden it'll be like, well, I didn't do that, or I don't contribute to your marginalization, even if they actually do, even if they actually are doing so in the course of the conversation. A lot of times it'll come out. A lot of times they'll pretend to be really polite at the beginning and be like, well, excuse me, but I resent that you said males all do this. And I'm like, I didn't say all men. You know, the whole like, not all men thing. I'm not talking about all men, but I am talking about people who do this, who tend to be protected by masculine culture, you know, toxic masculine culture. They tend to be protected by other people who believe that way. and told that they don't have to rethink these things, that they're not hurting anyone, that it's simply their biological right to act this way toward women, to deserve certain things from women, and it only applies to the people who buy into that. I have never said all men do a thing, or all cis people do a thing, or all non-asexual people do a thing. But if it resembles you enough that you feel like you have to defend yourself and your population against my incredibly harmful words, then you might want to think about, why is your first thought, I have to say, hey, there are good people with me, there are good people like me, I know people that are not like this. Nobody said you didn't, nobody said this was you, but it might be if you're talking like that. Anyway, but evidently people like my commenter that I just shared with you believe that I'm mad at straight cis men for harassing asexual people, and that I said this only comes from cis straight men. It does not. And so now for the second part of this video, I would also like to point out that there's a rising trend for TERFs to come after asexual people, to come after asexuality as a concept, to come after, most of the time, female asexual people. And it was puzzling to me at first when I started to see it, how often they just seemed really, really mad at asexual people. And occasionally I would see radical feminists saying things to people on Twitter, including me once, that, well, asexuality as a concept is anti-feminist because you're taking away the sexual nature of women and denying that women can be sexual. And I'm like, that's definitely not what we said. And incidentally, the message that asexual people who also identify as feminists should be internalizing is that it's about choice, not about you must have sex. That sex is good, period. All amounts of sex are good, period. And you should have as much sex as you can because it's good, period. The key word is choice. And if your choice is sometimes to be yes, it also has to be respected when it's no, even if the choice is always no. That is also acceptable, and it should be understood in feminist circles that it's the choice that's important, not how much sex is being had. I can understand why some of them might have this knee-jerk reaction that asexual people are denying their sexual self, and that it must be some kind of internalized sex hate or feeling that women are not supposed to be sexual and refusal to embrace libido because of being embarrassed or being shamed because we're female. It's kind of a first thought for a lot of people who are encountering asexual people for the first time, is like, oh, well, maybe you're frigid, maybe you're scared, maybe you just don't know yourself, and you need encouragement that it's okay to like sex, you're not a pervert. And it's like, no, you wouldn't be a pervert for liking sex, but I don't. And that should also be okay. But what I've been seeing more often lately with the rise of TERFs, which, if you don't know the term, I'm kind of jealous of you, but the term refers to trans-exclusionary radical feminists, and sometimes they refer to themselves as gender critical, stuff like that. And there are some important questions that can dovetail with some of the things that they say, which is why it can be kind of dangerous to end up in those circles, because of course we should be asking questions about gender essentialism. Of course we should be asking questions about gender markers and why is a piece of clothing considered gendered, etc. Why does gender have to be so important in our external signifiers and in our sexual identity? But you can still ask those questions while still being a person to whom your gender is very important. And especially for people who have had to fight to be recognized as their true gender, like many non-binary and trans people have. And there, I say that separately because there are some non-binary people who don't identify as trans, but a lot of non-binary people do identify as trans, so I just want to be inclusive of both of those groups, and for binary trans people as well. But I want to say sometimes it's been quite a battle for them to arrive at this right to consider themselves what they have always felt that they are, and this fight against other people saying, no, you're not, to finally be able to fully embrace that and have others embrace it. So somebody striding in there and saying, well, gender's not real, and you're actually hurting women by doing this. It's just very uncomfortable sometimes. So again, it's kind of up to choice. It's like, how much does this matter to you? For some people, gender just isn't important. For some people, it is. But there's been a rise in TERFs connecting asexuality with their weird version of what they think trans people and their advocates are pushing for. Most specifically, along with the homophobes who are saying that acceptance of LGB identities and beyond are grooming. I'm sure that you've probably heard this if you keep up on a lot of the queer news. You see a lot of homophobes and people who are certain kinds of conservative politics will say that people on the left are grooming your children to be gay and all of this, and lumped in with that is transgender people who advocate for acceptance of trans kids. And obviously a lot of people come to their identity as a young person, as a child. They may know from very early in their life that the gender assigned to them at birth is not their correct gender, and they may be outspoken about that. You know, a lot of them also get swallowed up in coercive assignments of gender, but a lot of them always felt like they were something other than what their parents or doctors told them they were. And so sometimes a trans child will have supportive parents or supportive medical professionals who will recommend that they go on puberty blockers. And that saves them from going through the wrong puberty so that they can make decisions that will make them happier in their adult bodies. The puberty blockers are not permanent. They're not, when you're on a puberty blocker, it's just blocking your hormones from making you develop your secondary sex characteristics. And what that does is it buys time for people who are minors, who are considered to be under the age of consent for something like surgery, to be able to, not develop things that are body changes that will cause them to feel less comfortable in their bodies as they get older. It may just make their physical transition easier when they're an adult if they decide to have one. And if they don't, they just go off the puberty blocker and their puberty will happen of the gender they were assigned at birth. So you will hear a lot of people misrepresenting it as, oh, they want to give these kids the hormones to desexualize them or to sterilize them. They want to perform surgery on children, blah, blah, blah. It's child abuse. The opposite is child abuse, coercively forcing them to go through the wrong puberty and adopt the wrong gender pronouns and everything that goes with that. I mean, that is what causes despair and hopelessness. And, you hear a lot of statistics about how many transgender people feel hopeless enough to consider or attempt or carry out suicide. And I don't think it should have to be that bad for people to agree, yes, we should listen to people about who they are, even if they're children, and also make it easier for them to, if they really will, as the detractors always say, if they really will grow out of it when they're older, no harm done. Puberty blockers have been used to treat precocious puberty for a very long time in non-trans kids. In cisgender kids, that's a thing that happens sometimes, and it's obviously it's recognized by medical professionals and psychologists and anybody who pays attention that if you go through puberty, when you're, a preschooler or something, and there's something wrong with your body, and it starts to develop those characteristics too early, that can be devastating, and they know that. So I don't know why they don't understand that, if you go through a psychologically damaging version of puberty because you're transgender, that, that some people are so bothered by that, that not only going through it, but, not having as many easy options when they get older to make decisions about surgeries they may want. So it's not like those things haven't been used without these arguments when it wasn't about trans kids, and all of a sudden when it's about trans kids, they're like, oh no, these are bad, these are unsafe, we don't know what they do, blah, blah, blah. And they do know what they do. They've been in use for a very long time. Anyway, so somehow asexuality has gotten hooked to this movement among some TERFs. And the TERFs are saying that because they're portraying these puberty blockers and or hormone treatments for, if you are approved to get testosterone supplements or estrogen, progesterone, whatever, but that you get these treatments that it will, quote, sterilize you, that it's sterilizing children. And obviously, many trans people who choose to physically transition are acknowledging that, if they take certain medical treatments, they will be possibly temporarily or permanently incapable of reproduction. And this is also a decision that is allowed for people who aren't transgender. You can have a vasectomy, you can have tubal ligation, you can have various procedures to decide not to have children. And that is something that is a personal decision. But when they disingenuously present it as something bad being done to children by the leftist mob, they talk about these side effects of hormone treatments as sterilizing children, and somehow that is also associated with the perception that asexual people are the result of that we are sterilized people that have no sexual urges because of the transgenders. And it's absolutely ludicrous, because, even though there is a large overlap between the trans community and the ace community, and there are lots of people who are both, still the majority of asexual people are not transgender and have never taken hormones. And we aren't asexual because we've been chemically castrated. It's a common misconception, I suppose, that it has to be something biological, and that's another thing that you find with TERFs a lot, is this biological essentialism, that your body is meant to do certain things and is fundamentally a certain thing at birth. And it's very disconcerting how many false assumptions and disingenuous presentations of information have to be accepted for you to start passing around the idea that asexual people are tied up in sterilizing children or are the result of hormone treatments or puberty blockers. But somehow this has become a talking point. I think it started in the United Kingdom, which I don't think it's any coincidence that J.K. Rowling is doing her work there with the anti-transgender crap that she keeps spewing. It's very unfortunate. So there have been a lot of laws and a lot of negative attention, a lot of media about the threat of trans people over there, and a lot of it splashes over to other places that are influenced by those same sources. So you'll see it in many communities, but especially those that have international crossover, you'll be more likely to see it. So anyway, after cisgender straight men, I would definitely say that TERFs come in second for the people that harass asexual people for existing. In some places, the TERFs are even louder now. But I think for me, a lot of my just personal interactions happen to have been with straight men who are propositioning me romantically and sexually, and then are mad that they can't talk me out of it. They can't talk me out of being asexual, because of their own weird needs. They just absolutely need to convince somebody that doesn't want them. I just don't understand that. Like, talk to somebody who at least likes men. But I guess they like the idea that they're so irresistible that even a proclaimed non-interested person would just have to fall for them because they're that great. They just love their weird mythology. But you also don't have to be a cisgender straight man or a TERF to harass asexual people. I have been harassed, even one of my top 10 most disgusting harassers has been an older cisgender straight woman. Actually, I think there's 2 or 3 of them that I've been harassed by, like, deeply, by women older than me. One of them was a nasty homophobe who was always going after queer activists and trying to get them in trouble, writing to their employers about them doing queer activism, trying to get them in trouble. That lady tried to write to my publisher, like as if my publisher didn't know what they published. I've been harassed in one of my other videos. I talked about a woman who harassed me over maturity concerns, and I had another older woman tell me I was a cock tease and was just afraid of men. So it's like, anyway. I have also weirdly been harassed by a gay man, and that was over, him saying, I had been starting a discussion on Twitter about how if you want to be in a relationship with someone, you shouldn't assume that sex is obviously part of the deal. If you're in a romance, that sex will always follow, and that if sex is important to you and a certain amount of sex being guaranteed or available to you is very important in your relationship, you need to be able to talk about that, just like asexual people should be able to talk about their expectations, right? But in this Twitter thread, I talked a lot about how people perceive that only asexual people are the ones that need to disclose that they're ace. And I got into this argument with this gay man who was mad that I suggested that they shouldn't just expect sex because it's normal, and Of course they're gonna assume that. Why are you gonna make us have a conversation? You guys are the ones who are weird. They're just so opposed to communication that they're insulted that we would even say, you guys should have a conversation about this if this is important to you. Like, talk to your partners. Anyway, I actually can't think of like a demographic that I haven't seen some kind of anti-ace sentiment from. I've even gotten it from other asexual people. I mean, there's no group of people that just categorically loves us and never has a problem with our community, right? So, if my commenter happened to hear this, that was a very long, rambly way of saying that I have many receipts for people in my past who have personally confronted me with their prejudices against asexual people and were not straight cisgender men. They are absolutely not the only ones who are a problem for our community. And that's especially obvious to people who are not women, because many of the male asexual people that I know have been harassed by women about sex. Like, there are women who have a problem with men claiming to be asexual, you know, and obviously anybody who isn't a man or a woman has been harassed about asexuality if they're, you know, if they're non-binary, and they have been experiencing pushback for their sexuality because they're being told it's conflated with their gender and that it just is a symptom of them being confused. That happens all the time. So everybody who's ace, every gender, can get harassed for it by any demographic, any sexuality, and not only is it theoretically possible, but we have examples. So that's it for that subject, and I will be wrapping this one up here. I'll see y'all next time.